Well, I'm glad I just deleted 4 minutes of footage so you don't have to endure it. Welcome to This Is Here, a podcast about unique educational experiences, and welcome to our series Audio Adventures Ahoy, highlighting different recording equipment and how to use it in your instruction. I'm Adam Schechter, the instructional technology coach here at John R. Lewis High School, and I'm in the studios of Lancer Media as usual, and I had an idea to bring this podcast to the next level. So this time we're adding video for the first time, as I am recording both on camera and on our podcasting equipment right here in the TV studio. And that said, the goal is to have this be an enjoyable experience for all, whether you're listening on Spotify or Apple or anywhere else you get your podcast, or you're actually catching this on video. You can still very much listen to the show driving around, and don't feel compelled to watch while you're driving because that's just a bad idea. So why add video to a podcast? I mean, normally I encourage my students to get on camera, and I am not really a big fan of that myself. So that's why I'm like, they talk about teachers teach it, they don't do it. But I felt like there was something around here that I wanted to get out a little bit more. And so I wanted to expand kind of the demonstrations and things I'm able to show. So I figured adding video would be great. And, maybe it wasn't challenging enough to go and put out an audio podcast and edit it and publish it. But now, we're going to add the video to that as well. So there you go. And if you've heard the show before, or maybe you happen to be at Visti last few years, Audio Adventures Ahoy could be familiar to you. It is the title of my presentation from the 2024 Visti conference. And much of it was about introductory points in using audio and video equipment to expand your instruction and expand what students can do in the classroom with your projects particularly. And now I was going to go and turn that into an audio and video guide on some of these basics. So today, this is the first episode, and it's going to cover largely sort of the why I love using audio and video in instruction. I used to do that as a classroom teacher, and now as an instructional technology coach here at John R. Lewis High School. I encourage it, and I work with teachers on their audio and visual use. So I wanted to share that out as well with some of the equipment that we use. So for each device that I'm going to demonstrate, I'm going to talk about its basic functions, what type of lessons or activities it's great for, maybe some alternatives that have similar functionality, but also maybe a bit more friendly to your budget. And in the YouTube description and the show notes, I'll have a link to the presentation that sort of spawned all of this, and also include basically information on how to get all the gear that I'm talking about during this series. And maybe I'll throw in some other stuff that I didn't quite get into my presentation, but I'm certainly using it now with students, and there's a few little tools here and there. So I wanted to make that a whole video series. Now I'm going to talk about cost for a little bit. I happen to present for a group of technology specialists in my own district not too long ago, and I could kind of feel a tension around discussing cost, because I know that we're budget conscious here in Fairfax County. We're not expected to have a great budget, and certainly not enough or more money to buy a lot of this gear that I am talking about. And I'm sure if you're listening in whatever school district you're in, it may be something similar that you're talking about. So I do want to lay out the fact that a lot of the gear that I'm talking about is stuff that I've purchased through the school over the series of years. My own principal has certainly been very generous and believes in sort of this cause of using audio and visual equipment with students and knows the benefits of it. And so, yes, he has funded a lot of my asks and my wants, and yes. And also, if you hear some sounds, that is a physics classroom right above me. So I don't know what they drop on there. Like weights, who knows? Anyway, so yeah, he's been very giving and very supportive personally, but also I went out and looked for grants, and that has helped. We got kind of lucky when CARES Act came around post pandemic. We were able to buy a lot of equipment using CARES funding that I probably would not have been able to get under like normal circumstances. So there's certainly that circumstance as well. Because yes, like audio and visual gear is very expensive, but I do believe that, you know, the gear itself sort of helps the student experience, and students learn so much by just working with this equipment, figuring out how best to use it, and being incredibly creative when it comes to their final product. So I certainly want to get that out there. All right. So what's my best advice? When it comes to using AV gear, you do not need a whole TV studio full of stuff in order to do wonderful things with students. Like, it's just not completely necessary. Think small, like really think small and see what kind of budget you have, or maybe some sort of funding that you could get either from your department or a principal, you know, and when you make the most of that, you know, the results that you'll see, I think that will also lead to getting a little more funding from your school in the future. So you'll see like what that, you know, how that really helps you. And then also like grants. So we're Fairfax County. So Fairfax County has its own like foundation, and it's been handing out teacher grants for the last few years for different projects. And so I got funding for some of my audio visual gear from that. So ironically not this year, but that's another story. So grants are great. Maybe you could reach out to local businesses. You can see if like you're running a news show or something, ask them to sponsor you. I mean, we have plenty of ads on our football field and in our gym. And so maybe some of the local businesses in your community, like they might be able to supply you with some funding in exchange for a shout out on your news show or something else. Again, check your policies and regulations. You know, here in Fairfax in Virginia, there are a lot of regulations and rules and things. So definitely check on that kind of stuff, particularly with fundraising. Okay. So with that out of the way, I did want to get into why I've loved audio projects. So personally, I've loved using audio and radio since I was in junior high school. So I discovered college radio in high school, and I was hooked. You know, here are these DJs, they were playing music that I like, which was very loud and very obscure for most high schoolers back in the early 90s. Little did I know, like 20 years later, that a lot of the music I listened to is just seen as like a golden age for some of the like loud, aggressive stuff I would listen to. But, you know, there was that. And so these DJs were there and they were playing stuff, and you listened to their show and they just sounded like they were having the time of their lives just behind that microphone. And they would give out the call-in number, and I would call them up and chat with them for a little bit. And they were like, "Oh, you're just in high school, man? Like, yeah, you should totally do this in college. And oh, hey, what's your name? And what song you want to hear? All right, cool. You know, I got you." And we hang up the phone and I keep listening. And then next thing you heard is like, "Oh, this one goes out to Adam and Valley Stream." Yeah. And I was like, he said my name, you know, and I would go into school the next day and I would say, "Yeah, I got a shout out on the air, you know, on the radio." And no one I knew like cared. Like it's so typical of me of, you know, someone's like, "Oh, those are like a cool accomplishment that like I care about that no one else does." Like that's just me in a nutshell. But that would set me on my path. When I was looking at colleges in particular, I was definitely looking at colleges where they had radio stations that I can join. And I happened to go to Binghamton University in upstate New York. And I joined WHRW and I lived there. I was there for 4 years as an undergraduate, and then 2 more years in grad school and a community member. And I just loved it. Loved it. So I think my experience there taught me so many other skills, and I share with students all the time, like in my news show here at Lewis, but certainly in my teaching career. I talked about like when you're part of the radio station and you're an active part and you're like in leadership, you're one of the directors. You learn so much about communicating, about working with others, and you're building like so many other skills that it's hard to replicate that doing other things. I learned things like organizing projects, expressing myself through shows, like kind of organizing arguments, and just being able to relate to somebody, like whether it was trying to make radio interesting and trying to play shows that I thought people would like, but also like when people would call up the station and just talking to like random strangers, like that was something that, was very valuable, I think, as a young adult, and helps even now, just kind of day to day, just talking with people. So, I don't want to go too much about personal experience, but like when I talk about media projects, like it is certainly like a love that I've had for a number of years, and just being able to impart that on students has just been, just been amazing. All right. So part of this is like obvious, right? So as teachers, you think about classroom management, you think about one of the things that you're trying to do is like contain student talking, because students love to talk. I mean, I taught middle school, and those middle schoolers could not get enough of their own voice, which was weird because I had a hard time sometimes getting them on camera, but oftentimes they were like, we just want to hear ourselves. And I said, all right. So, they enjoy expressing themselves, particularly, using audio, using their voice. And I said, look, this is a great outlet, right? So if I could go and guide that enthusiasm into a productive activity, whether it's part of a project, whether it's something else, you give that student a positive outlet for something that they want to do already. And then all of a sudden you are adding rocket fuel to that creativity. So, one big piece is how I used audio projects to foster that student creativity and critical thinking. So oftentimes I wouldn't use audio as like the only thing, but when I was working with students as a classroom teacher, it was a component. So if I had a like project-based learning activity where students were simulating an election, or if they were doing the Shark Tank activity where they had to create a business plan and actually pitch it to a group of sharks, like those sorts of things had some sort of component where they had to create a commercial, they had to do some like advertising, a jingle. In one of the projects I said, hey, do a retrospective about your business like 5 years later, kind of imagine where it would be in the future and like things like that. And I remember these group of girls basically did this podcast about talking about how they would all be in jail. It's like, yes, our business failed and then we frauded everybody. I think it was great. It was very funny, very creative. And then working with students here at Lewis, it's like those audio projects really bring things to the next level, whether it's like interview ones or ones where they're talking about books. They're expressing themselves. And so you think about a lot of the intangibles here, where you're using audio to get students thinking about your content in new and creative ways. But the creativity doesn't end with just simply your work. It doesn't end necessarily with the content. They got to talk about script writing, outlining, pacing, tone, persuasion, all of those things that are vital for communication. Those are all things that are really required in any of these audio projects. So they'll need to think about their audience and incorporating that as part of their final project in a way that's sort of different from the usual expectations for a lot of the projects they submit. So those sort of creative skills and collaborative skills, like they're so beneficial, and it's something that I want to help foster when it comes to my role as a technology specialist. All right. So think about the critical thinking, right? So when you're using audio projects, critical thinking comes through in a number of ways. So first, they need to evaluate their information critically. They need to decide what will go in their final product. So if they're doing interviews, it's about like what questions they're doing. Maybe if they're doing a book talk, they have to sort of look at the list of facts and look at the information from the book that they want to bring in there. It's certainly all there. And they have to decide like which pieces of information are most important, which can be left off. They have to decide what will build their narrative the strongest and what might not support their position quite as well. So they'll need to determine the structure of their projects to make sure it all flows well and it's pleasing to the listener. And collaboration is another key element here. I kind of touched on it earlier. And that's a key element of many audio project success. And when you're putting a project together, considering collaboration is very important. So the collaborative piece is really where it kind of kicks into high gear. Many of the projects that I've worked on or have helped other teachers work on these things, you can see the students sort of discuss their opinions. They're trying to come up with like an order, talking about the different roles that they will play, like building their projects together. And all of them feel this sense of agency in the process because they're able to kind of work things out amongst themselves in their group. And like the dynamics in an audio project are very similar to those in like a modern work project or like college level group work. And so many other places where they're going to need to decide amongst themselves, like what their roles are going to be, what are their responsibilities, what are they bringing to this project? Like that's all something that's going to have to be like sussed out. And that you have that when it comes to these like audio projects. So, they're all very, very important. All right. So another area of student success in audio projects is through choice and voice. And, again, you don't need to go very far nowadays, particularly in teaching, where choice and voice are certainly like hammered into everybody's heads. It's certainly a key part of a lot of professional developments and many, many, many advocates out there. And as we kind of discussed earlier in the show, in a different episode, we talked about universal design for learning, and choice and voice are certainly central in a lot of the UDL language, and when you have project-based learning and working with students with different abilities and advanced academics and all of that sort of lobbed into one place, the value of choice and voice is very present. So in audio projects like this is no different. So we'll talk a little bit about that later. All right. So the final why when it comes to audio projects, that I'm going to bring up here is to talk about, the alignment with state and Common Core standards. So many content standards, they're including standards for communication, organizing and expressing views, oral communication, and, others across disciplines that are addressed using, audio creation. So it's what makes these type of projects even more valuable in your classroom, because not only are you practicing a valuable skill, you're making something engaging for students. It's also a critical part of many of the standards and curriculum out there for all contents. So many of them. All right. So I'm not saying to design your entire course through audio projects. Like I wouldn't ever talk about that. Even as a technology specialist, I've talked to a lot of teachers and said, I'm not advocating for using tech all the time. Like that's just it's not feasible. But where can you put audio projects to have it make the most sense and get the greatest impact? So they work best typically as an option for summative assessments, maybe as part of a PBL project. They're great for substitutes for some of the projects that you're already doing. So if you're asking students to summarize the plot or the theme of a book, transforming it into like a book talk podcast or an open discussion, like that's a great option because they still have to do the work to identify the content. And maybe instead of writing it down as an essay, now they're putting together a script. So they're still writing. They're still working on that part of communication, but they're writing with the intent to read it later. And so that brings like another dimension into things, because now you're talking about like reaching out to an audience, like communicating clearly, writing clear enough so that you can say it later. You're adding like so many other things like because of that. Maybe you can have them turn into like a news radio simulation if you're asking students to do like practice interviews, right? So kind of bring some of the reporter mentality or like basics of journalism like into this project that may have been pretty simple from the start, but now you're really adding to it. All right, so this is again the tip of the proverbial iceberg, as you might think. There are many forms of audio and discussion projects that your students can do. So podcast is one where I'm particularly interested in. Obviously, I'm doing the podcast right now. I love this medium. As somebody who has done so many radio shows in the past and thought a little bit about making it a career, podcasting is like a great entry point into having your own show, because literally anybody can have their own show right now. You just have to have an idea, a little bit of recording stuff, and that's pretty much it. I mean, there's so many, even nowadays, free platforms like this. This show alone is on, what was Anchor, now run by Spotify, and at the moment it's all free. Like there's no cost for me to go record a show and upload it up to Spotify and then have it be shared out to everywhere, which is true. You can find this show anywhere, whether it's Stitcher, whether it's Apple, no longer Google. Google's gone, RIP. But even on like Pocket Casts, which is what I use as a podcast player myself, like it's always there. Okay. So yes, I do love podcasts. I love the fact that you can have the most random show on any topic in the world, and you can pretty much like do a show for it, right? Like why not? All right. But as a tech coach, I've helped students create podcast projects that have took the shape of book discussions or interviews or general discussions. Helping students understand school resources, like some of the advice podcasts, like even more. You might also have debates, sort of like one-on-one or even like group debates, like philosophical chairs. And you can do that through audio. I mean, we had in here, it was on video, but we had like a full scale like panel debate, and we recorded it for video, but it certainly would work in an audio medium as well. Right? Students can turn speeches, monologues, persuasive speeches, all those into audio projects where you can ask them to add other elements into their speech, such as music or soundscapes, audio reactions or audience reactions, things like that. So yeah, you can do something where they have to work on their public speaking, but can you find complementary music with it? Can you, creatively edit this so that not only is it your speech and how powerful that is, but you're making like a multimedia project out of this, right? So it just sort of adds like another layer. Maybe some like radio dramas. You can carry those out, like if you're doing like creative writing or like a theater or drama class or things like that. Like those are great ideas to incorporate audio, like have students create radio dramas. So not only do they have to come up with their own script, they also have to keep in mind that the audience cannot see them. So what are some of the conditions and expectations that you would have, right? Like they would be just very creative. Get my, trying to encourage kids to basically recreate, like Welcome to Night Vale or something like that, like a fiction podcast that I happen to like a lot. I think that'd be a great audio project. All right. So if they're doing a creative writing assignment, maybe have them do like an audio book version of it. So they have like a story that they've done. They make an audio book, like a recording of it. And then they have to think about like inflection and tone as they read their work. And maybe add like director's commentary or writer's commentary or something like that. Like what inspired them to do this fiction work? Like where did their ideas come from, right? Like things like that. And then I kind of mentioned news radio, but you can do that for historical context. So like what like a news show or news radio show during the Revolutionary War era would look like, or say the era of Napoleon or things like that. Those are all great ways to use audio in a very creative way. And then like other things could be like a how-to guide or audio study guides or something like that. Think about the like Notebook LM from Google and how you can just feed it all of this information and then it's going to go and turn it into a podcast that you can then listen to. Well, have your students do that, right? Like synthesize the information they get in class and turn it into a study guide or something like that that's actionable, that they could use on an assessment, that they can share with other students. Like all those sorts of things are, they're all out there for the taking. So, okay, so maybe you're hooked now, right? So maybe you're ready to roll. So what are some general tips for audio projects that you might consider if you're looking to get started? So the first thing is have a plan in mind and be very intentional about how you're going to use audio in your project. Again, we're going to get to choice and voice in a bit because that's definitely another tip. But you're going to need some parameters in your project when you create it. So thinking about what you want students to do and what the intention of the audio being creative is going to be. Is it summative? Is it building knowledge? Is it practice? Like what do you want to use this audio for? You may want to create a sample yourself so that students get an idea of what you're expecting them to do. I know sometimes in practice we kind of go back and forth on that. It's like, well, you can let students do whatever they want. And if you create a model, they're just going to go follow the model. It's like, I don't think that always happens that way. But I think sometimes they need that extra structure as opposed to like just send them off free and saying, here, go record something. And then you don't really know what you're going to get. So having something that's prepared and also puts you sort of through that process of what the students are going to go through, right? So it helps you make shifts in the project planning before you ask them to do something that you couldn't even do yourself. So you just want to like add that sort of realistic touch. All right. So thinking about UDL, universal design, you might want to consider supports and structures for students that they can use for the assignment. So maybe you're going to provide sample questions for interviews or prompts that all students can use. They don't have to. Perhaps like a organizer or a visual to help students out, in the organization phase, right? So putting things together. So those are sorts of things that definitely help like map things out and make a project more successful. So when you talk about the expectations, like you want to have those expectations for their final project. Like that's definitely a thing to consider, which is why I was advocating for creating a sample. So it doesn't mean that every product has to be the same. It just means that you are looking at, say, the length of the show, right? Or final audio. So you're asking for students to do like 1 minute of audio or like 10. Which of those are you looking for in terms of like time limiting? What kind of content, like how many pieces of content do they need to bring or how many facts? How often is someone expected to speak? Like those sorts of things to set those expectations, I think will certainly help when you have those sort of guardrails set up so that students have freedom, but they don't feel as though they're like overwhelmed with what you might consider like project paralysis, where they don't know where to start. Like they at least have some idea about where to start. So, all right. Lastly, let's talk about equipment and editing for the basics. So you as the teacher, or at least with your specialist, should certainly understand the equipment and the editing process that you're asking the students to use. So if you're asking students to use a particular microphone, you should know how to use it, demonstrate it for them, or at least have somebody that's knowledgeable working with you, like a tech specialist or somebody else, and they can demonstrate it. If you're using editing software, right? So for audio, if you're using like Audacity, or maybe you're using like WeVideo to do audio editing, as the teacher, you should understand how the basics work, whether it's cutting, manipulating, adding effects, all that sort of stuff. So the ability to demonstrate to students like how this stuff works will go a very long way in the future. It'll probably help to answer some of their questions that they already have, and then just being prepared later for some of the questions that they're going to ask. Like those things are very, very important. Okay. So, thinking about like barriers and things, you want to make sure that they're able to get audio from whatever device you're asking them to record on into the editing program, and then from there being able to get it to you. Right. And so making sure that the workflow and like that sort of stuff is very clear and that you understand sort of how all that works. And so that you can help students plan to upload their files. Like, how's that going to go? Like all that sort of stuff. So, unfortunately, there are a lot of technical requirements with some of these audio projects, and being able to troubleshoot if something goes wrong or being prepared if it doesn't quite go the way you expect, or even just being able to answer student questions, like those are all going to be very important when it comes to the overall success of the project. All right. So when you're planning these projects, when you're talking about audio projects, you might want to think of like the basic equipment, the tools that you're going to need to accomplish this, right? So it could be the same piece of gear that serves multiple purposes. That's great. Maybe you have like a microphone that's also a recorder. So that's, those are fantastic. I have several of those things. Maybe you have an audio device that plugs into a computer and your computer is the recorder. Like however this is going to go. Maybe even, that devil's tool, like your phone, like having that ready and being in use. I mean, that's a dirty word, right? Like your phone, like, ooh. Crazy enough, phones usually are able to record, edit, and publish audio in one device. So again, it'll vary. And I think like a lot of this just depends on your district and what you're able to do. In my school, the phones are a no-go. So there's that. All right. So just being prepared for like what it is that you're going to need, and then also deciding like what kind of editing program or thing that your students are going to use. So whether it's something free like Audacity, maybe it's something that educators can use generally like Canva or Adobe Express. Maybe you're asking students to work in like WeVideo, which does have a pretty reasonably robust free version. Or if you're going out and getting the paid version of WeVideo, or you're doing something a little advanced and you're able to have access to like Adobe Express, or full Adobe Creative Cloud. So you're using like Adobe Audition, like I am over here, Pro Tools, if you're using Macs, things like that. So, or Final Cut, right? No, Final Cut's video for Mac. Whatever the audio thing for Mac is, which I can't think of off the top of my head. But yeah, those are, things that you really need to understand. All right. So the last piece of this, when you're thinking about creating projects, is thinking about how will students share their audio with you? How will they submit their work? Which sounds easy, but it isn't always. So sometimes the easiest answer is Google Drive, like giving them access to a Google Drive folder and they drop the files in there. Cool. Maybe you have Schoology, Canvas, Blackboard, a learning management system that will have like a Dropbox system where students can upload stuff as an assignment. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Maybe you want to go a little more public. Maybe you're doing a project with students that you want like the rest of the world to hear. So something like Spotify for podcasters, I think it's now called Creative for Spotify for creators, I think is like the new name of it. There are some options that I can talk about in a different part of the series, but you want to make sure you have that set. So for example, here at Lewis High School, most of the time when we're doing audio projects, I do recommend using Schoology, like a Schoology assignment. There's an option for students to upload files directly as a submission. And usually that's the easiest way to go. But they could also throw it in like Google Slides and share it with you that way. And even Google Vids, like that's now a new tool that Google put out for Google for Education. I did a whole show about highlighting some of the features of Google Vids, but that's also another way where even though it's for vids, it still works great as audio projects. Just have them put like a cover image and their audio. Done. All right, so let's see. The one last thing I will mention is when you're ready to start purchasing things, just definitely look for education pricing from different retailers. So like one example, because I usually buy most of my stuff from there, is B&H Photo and Video. They're they started out as like a camera superstore, but basically they're like a full AV superstore based in New York City in Manhattan on 9th Avenue. I've been to the store a few times myself. It is just a few blocks away from Penn Station. So if you've ever been to Manhattan, it's pretty much like right there. And make sure you set up a tax exempt account, of course, as a school, and look for educator discounts. So, usually like B&H prices are pretty good for the average consumer, but because we have a educator's account with them, the prices are usually even better. The next thing of advice I'm going to tell you about is making sure you're buying from an authorized reseller. This is really important if you're buying stuff from, say, like Rode. We do have a lot of Rode products. And Rode will only honor the warranty if you register it and you can document that you bought it from an authorized reseller. So we have had things of Rode like break, not often actually, and not recently. But when we've had to submit for a warranty replacement. And, when you register your product with Rode by buying it from an authorized retailer, it is much easy to do the RMA to return it and get it back from Rode without too much of an issue. So yes, the one or two times that I've had to go and send stuff back to Rode, it's actually been really easy to do. So just make sure that, you're getting it from an authorized place. Be very, 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 very careful with stuff like Amazon. Because Amazon, as you probably know, doesn't always sell everything that's on its website. So make sure it's coming from Amazon itself and that Amazon is an authorized retailer. So again, just be careful about that before you dump a lot of money into something. You want to make sure that you have warranty protection on that. All right, so let's get into the first piece of gear. So that's really like the why. That's really the overview about audio projects, like how to get into them, some planning considerations, and some of the benefits. So hopefully that introduction alone was worth it to you to kind of understand like where I'm at as a specialist and why I really like audio projects so much. So from here on out, the bulk of the series is going to be about the different pieces of equipment. So for today, I'm only going to highlight one, I guess two, I suppose, because the first thing to know is that maybe you don't want to buy anything at all, because if you are a one-to-one school, you may have some sort of device, whether it's a laptop, whether it's an iPad, a tablet, something along those lines, Chromebooks, and they all have microphones. And you know something? For what you want to do, oftentimes the onboard microphone is good enough. And if you're talking about solo projects or ones where you can use, say, the computer's webcam along with its microphone, cool. Like, you might be able to just get by just for that. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that because, you know that your computer has a microphone. So not really going to care about that. All right. But maybe you want to up your game just a little bit. So the first thing, the first sort of piece of gear I want to talk about is small USB microphones. So for example, I have a very small microphone right here. This is the Samson Go microphone. And, small USB microphones are really ideal for a lot of recording situations. First off, they plug in right into the computer and oftentimes do not need extra software to install. So I know like for here, you most teachers and students for sure cannot install software. So having a USB microphone plugging right into the computer, no muss, no fuss. And typically a USB microphone will work for Windows, Chromebook, Mac. You don't need to worry about preamps, other cables. The worst you may need is, say, an adapter to go from USB-C to USB-A, like something like that. But, so think about this. I've got the Samson Go Mic right here. It is plugged in. It's got a USB cable right here. And it comes with this cute little case where it fits. The wire doesn't fit in the case, which is interesting. So normally I'll just sort of wrap the wire around the case when I move it around, but here's what it is. Something else awesome about this microphone is that it has a clip. So this little clip right here, you can use that to put it on top of your laptop. So just kind of like stick it up top here. It also can stand up. So this little stand over here, and it just sort of balances and you're kind of good to go. So it's easy to set up. And the other cool thing about this is it has 2 different pickup patterns. So a pickup pattern with a microphone is basically the direction for which it will pick up sound. So when I'm using the main microphone here, so I'm using like this microphone pickup pattern is like pretty much just in front of my face. It doesn't pick up that much sound beyond about like 1.5 feet away, right? So if I go, like the further I go from the microphone, like the less I'm able to be heard. So normally with a microphone like this, you want to, be about 4 or 5 inches or so you can hear yourself the best. All right, but with this USB microphone, this has that. So it has a setting on the side right here, and it has one setting like this, which means it'll pick up the front. It looks like a little upside down heart. It also has what's called -10 as a setting. And I did actually create a sample recording with it. I'll share in a second. And that just means it's not going to record as loud. And sometimes that's better because it's not going to pick up as much noise. So it's really just picking up what you want, especially if you're talking right in front of it. But the last setting of this switch down below is a circle. So the circle here means omnidirectional. So omnidirectional is like on both sides. So you can clip this to a computer and put it in the middle of a table and have everybody basically be heard, right? So that's really key. So it's very versatile in that way. And like I said, it kind of folds up like this, and then you can easily store it. So really great. It does play it does, it has like a little LED in the front. That's something else to keep in mind. And it's green. Green means it's got power. It's ready to go. But it does go red, and red means that it's too loud. So if you do put this in front of your face, or you're yelling or have a loud voice in front of it, you'll notice that it'll go red. Like if I like tap on it like that, it kind of gets that red thing. So just watch out for this LED. Just keep it green as they are. So that's awesome. So this is a really great entry point if you're just looking for like a dedicated microphone that has maybe better sound than your current laptop or Chromebook. In fact, I do have a sample of me talking with this microphone right here. So let me play it for you right now. Here is a sample recorded with the Samson Go Mic at the -10 setting with about 50% recording volume. It's great for normal applications, especially in world language classes, when you want to record different conversations or other interactions with students. Pour pratiquer l'expression orale en cours de français ou parler avec un ami. All right, so it's very versatile in that way. if you're looking for debate, like class discussion, monologue, like news reporting, even podcasting, like this mic can certainly help. Just be a little bit better than your standalone microphone. So the price of this is actually really good, and it's quite a selling point, and it's $30. So all of this and all the features that you get for this microphone are basically like $30. So if you're, looking to get, say, like a class set where you might have like 6 groups or something like that, that could run you about like $200 for a class set. It's actually pretty good. I'm thinking about some of the alternatives out there. You certainly have like a Blue Yeti, which is a lot more expensive. Does have some other like recording patterns, but similar functionality. And then something like the Rode NT USB Mini. That's a great personal mic, but doesn't have that omnidirectional pattern. So, but this is like sort of the first equipment recommendation that I'm going to make that I wanted to show off on the show. So I think with that, that's going to do it for this first episode of Audio Adventures Ahoy, at least in this series. So I wanted to cover again some of the basics of why and whys for audio recording. So hopefully you got something out of that. In the next video or podcast here in this series, we're going to talk about other gear that we use here at Lewis High School and how you can apply them in your instruction. So definitely follow the podcast at This Is Here Pod and Lancer_EdTech on Twitter, X, whatever. And then I'm over at Blue Sky at Lancer EdTech with no underscores because they don't do that in Blue Sky. So it's lanceredtech.bluesky.social. So it's like lanceredtech.bsky.social, right? Sure, whatever. Anyway, I want to thank you all for listening, watching, all of that for this experiment of This Is Here. So if you are listening on Spotify or Apple, please leave a rating. I certainly want to get this podcast out to more educators and all of that. So any way that you can help if you hear this would be totally appreciated. If you want to reach out to me directly through email, you can do so at thisisherepod@gmail.com. That's thisisherepod@gmail.com. So with that said, I'm Adam Schechter, the tech coach here at John R. Lewis High School in beautiful Springfield, Virginia. And I will see you next time.